We need to be mindful that each community has a different comfort level.
Tonight, back to class or remote learning. We look at how some communities are starting the school year.
I think that translates into, just a culture at the RCMP that really needs to be addressed by leadership.
Part 2 of our series into private RCMP member Facebook groups.
She helped me establish confidence in my pricing and knowing what fair market value was.
And we go to the Yukon to find the right price for Indigenous art. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. 2 former residential schools have been designated National Historic Sites. The announcement came today from Environment and Climate Change Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. The Portage La Prairie Residential School in Manitoba, along with a former school in Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia, were recognized. In 12 to 18 months, they will get bronze plaques outlining the tragic history that occurred here and in Shubenacadie. Meanwhile, NDP MP Charlie Angus was more critical of the announcement. Angus is a longtime advocate of survivors of the St. Anne's Residential School in Ontario, who have been fighting a long legal battle to get compensation for abuse.
St. Anne's survivors will be back in court in 2 weeks or 3 weeks because the government has suppressed evidence and continues to fight them. So if the government wants to do historically right by survivors, I would say it's important to recognize the buildings, but they need to do justice. And I'm sending this message clearly to Carolyn Bennett. You have to stop this toxic legal battle against the survivors of St. Anne's.
A pictograph on a rock on a First Nation in British Columbia has been spray painted over by vandals. Racist and vulgar statements were painted on the rock on Sioux Indian Band. For more, we're joined by Chief Clarence Louie. Chief Louie, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us what's happened to the pictograph?
Well, it was found on Saturday. We don't know what criminal did this, what low-life bum did this. But the pictograph, a bunch of swear words were put on it, a bunch of racist comments towards Native people, towards Indian people, towards reserves were actually put right on the pictograph. So we're pretty upset about it.
Chief, I understand you visited the site with police today. Is an investigation underway?
Well, if you want to call it an investigation, I mean, what can you do? I mean, it's hard to catch drug dealers. You have to catch them red-handed pretty well. And, they found some tracks, footprints, but those could be anybody. So the chances of much of an investigation happening is probably pretty remote.
Do you know how old the pictograph is, and is there any way to repair the damage that's been done?
Well, like any pictographs are all throughout Indian country or Turtle Island, and they're thousands of years old, hundreds of years old, pre-contact, and they're very important heritage value, spiritual value, and the symbolism is up there as high as you can get towards First Nations people.
Chief, do you have other pictographs that or is there any way to now protect what you have there now?
There's hundreds and hundreds of pictographs throughout our Okanagan traditional territory. And we're going to have a council meeting tomorrow. We're having a meeting on Friday with a bunch of traditional people, knowledge keepers, and come up with ideas and ways and means of trying to protect the pictographs that we can protect. But of course, this incident just shows us that there's racism everywhere. And it's not just in the U.S. I mean, Canada and the United States was founded on racism. When they took away the First Nations lands and broke treaties and sent our people to Indian residential schools and all the land theft. I mean, that's all based on racism.
Well, Chief, hopefully somebody will be brought to justice for this. Sioux Indian Band Chief. I don't like the word
justice. I don't want to use the word justice. We have to be specific. I want the individual to get their ass thrown in jail for many, many years. They have to go to jail. In the old days, they would have got their ass kicked. there would have been severe punishment for doing something like this. So the word justice is too lame a term. This individual or individuals, they're criminals, they need to get their ass thrown in jail for many, many years.
Well, Chief, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us here.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to hear your thoughts on the vandalism of the pictograph. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca, or find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. September means the beginning of a new school year, and that usually means full classrooms. But like most things this year, students will have to adapt to a new normal. First Nations and school authorities spent the summer preparing for schooling during the pandemic. And in some cases, class is already in session. Brittany Hobson has more.
We are looking at a way to put up to 22 kids in one classroom.
Before classes could commence in the Yukon, teachers had to come up with a viable way to enforce physical distancing measures. For Elijah Smith Elementary School in Whitehorse, that means this. In these classrooms, shower curtains hang in between some of the desks. Carrie Unraw had to get creative when coming up with solutions for her students.
Looking at various ideas over the summer, I tried making things out of PEX pipes and shields, and this shower curtain thing just happened to be the quickest, most effective, cheapest way to put kids together with a boundary that they can still communicate with.
Classes resumed in the territory last month. The Yukon has fared relatively well in COVID cases since the pandemic hit in March. They have only had 15 cases total, and with this new setup, they hope to keep it that way. In BC, students are preparing to head back to school next week. But one First Nations school has already been back for more than a month. Stein Valley Naklukkamuk School services 7 First Nations in the southern interior of the province. They opened classroom doors on July 27th. Edith Loring Kuhanga is the school administrator.
We decided that it was really too disruptive for our students to go through another year of chaos. Are they in school? Are they not in school? And so what we decided to do was to take a look at what our classrooms could actually physically hold.
The school normally operates year-round, but in spring had to switch to remote learning as cases rose in BC. When they reopened, they did so with alternating school days, reduced class sizes, and screening tools. Even with the extra protocols, Lauren Kuwanga believes students should be in the classroom.
But in many cases, schools are the best place for students. Schools are the ones that are the safe and a place to be, and they're also, generally speaking, the place that they get health and nutrition, they get emotional support, they get academic learning, so it's more than just a school.
In Saskatchewan, kids head back on September 8th. For Pasqua First Nation near Regina, that's been delayed until October.
We're trying to accommodate our students and their educational needs as best we can, as safe as we can.
Pasqua hasn't had any cases, but Chief Matthew Todd Pagan says even one would be too many. The community began preparing for back to school months ago. Pasqua owns Pro Metal Industries, a metal fabrication company based in Regina. The company shifted to making personal protective equipment like these plexiglass dividers. They are dubbing sugar cubes because of their shape.
Our company is manufacturing the equipment we need, and now we are created a reopening toolkit for any schools that require it.
They are now working with 9 other schools to get them into additional classrooms. Manitoba youth are also heading back to school September 8th. It is one of the few provinces where there have been no cases of COVID on a First Nation. Charles Cochran is the executive director of the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Centre. The organization oversees 11 schools under their system. Cochrane says there is some fear and anxiety in communities.
Certainly the numbers and the spiking, the numbers that we see on a daily basis now actually provides that fear. I think we've certainly been fortunate in First Nations that we haven't had those outbreaks or cases in our First Nations, and that's exactly what we want to leave it with, right?
3 schools have already decided not to return next week, instead opting for remote learning options. Also in the province, at least 1 school in the north won't be going back. Reg Clausen is the superintendent of Frontier School Division, which is the largest in Manitoba. The division includes schools in the remote north.
Communities want to be safe, and we know that in the north, we often have more people living per square foot because of the cost of housing. And so to get a case of COVID-19 into one of our small communities would mean that it might spread rather quickly.
Clausen says one of the challenges has been coming up with a way to accommodate teachers who fly into communities and have to self-isolate. He estimates this amounts to about 25% of their teachers.
This is unknown territory. And this is, we go where no person has gone before, in a sense. and so we need to be mindful that each community has a different comfort level.
Both Clausen and Cochrane emphasize this is a time to shift to land-based learning and cultural teachings, something the schools will be offering more of this fall.
I always say our First Nation and Anishinaabe people are resilient, and we've lived through many difficult times in our lives and in the chapters of our people. We're here today as still being strong, very strong people, so we know we can manage this.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
And we're wishing all the best for the students returning back to school and a safe school year ahead. Still to come, part 2 of our look into private RCMP Facebook groups. Stick around. Here's a look at your Wednesday weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 21 under the sun in Halifax, 20 in St. John's, 18 in Nain, 22 for Cartwright and Happy Valley, Goose Bay. Showers in 25 in Montreal, rain in 17 for Chibougamau. 26 with showers for Toronto and Ottawa. 19 in Thunder Bay, 17 with rain for Sioux Lookout. 16 with showers for God's Lake, 15 and rain in Norway House. 20 with showers for Winnipeg and Gimli, 18 with rain in Barons River. 19 with showers for Regina, 16 and rain in Saskatoon and North Battleford, 13 in Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Welcome back. Yesterday, APTN took an exclusive look inside private Facebook groups for current and former Mounties. Today, Indigenous RCMP veterans share their reaction and what it was like working in the force. Angel Moore brings us that story.
Systemic racism in the RCMP in the form of Facebook comments comes as no surprise to Indigenous veterans of the force. Marge Hudson, the first Indigenous woman in Manitoba to become a Mountie, was with the force for over 3 decades. Hudson says the racism began almost immediately.
They said I should be happy because they hired me and I was an Indian. I should be happy with the job that I had because I wouldn't have joined, they wouldn't have accepted me in any other regard.
2 years ago, Hudson was part of a sexual discrimination class action suit against the RCMP. Last July, she filed a class action lawsuit against the RCMP alleging systemic racism.
That Native people were weaker, that were second class. That's how I felt when I was in the RCMP. That's how they treated me, so that's how I felt.
Steve Glode, a 26-year RCMP veteran, says Indigenous officers were expected to fail.
But in particular, as First Nation officers, we had to work twice as hard to be considered equal. And you had to do that because you had these built-in barriers of how people see that.
Glode was the first commissioned Mi'kmaq officer from Nova Scotia in charge of Indigenous policing. He finished his career in Saskatchewan as an inspector. He says Indigenous policing was an afterthought.
They don't even know, like they devalue the position tied to Aboriginal policing because, you know what, it's just Indians policing Indians.
Glode says the needs of Indigenous communities and the differences between First Nations were ignored by the RCMP.
But as an Indigenous person, I'm Mi'kmaq. I'm not Cree, I'm not Saulteaux, I'm not Dene. But yet to come out here and to be in charge of Aboriginal policing here is truly an honor. But at the same time, I'm still an outsider. You know, I had a chance to be a leader in my province for my people and the organization. But to them, they're just Indians are Indians, right?
After initially struggling with the meaning of systemic racism, Commissioner Luckey admitted it is within her force. This is what she had to say at the House of Commons Public Safety Committee on June 23rd.
I have widened my lens and had a better sort of changing my perspective in the sense that there is systemic racism in the RCMP.
Naomi Metallic, a Mi'kmaq lawyer and professor, says the severity of racism is not recognized by the RCMP.
There's clearly deep seated views held by individual officers, retired officers, and I think that translates into you know, just a culture at the RCMP that really needs to be addressed by leadership.
The RCMP was created in 1873 to help clear the way for colonial settlement, such as taking children from families to residential schools and enforcing the pass system. Metallic says the history explains the deep mistrust.
Having no idea of this history, you know, eating up the misconceptions and stereotypes, like Indigenous people just get handouts, you know, they're all drunks, they don't work, all of this, being without any idea of that history and sort of operating from just a deep well of ignorance is just a recipe for disaster.
Systemic racism has become an election issue in New Brunswick. Indigenous leaders are calling for a provincial inquiry. Premier Blaine Higgs disagrees and says the federal government should take the lead. 3 opposition party leaders disagree. The ballots will be cast on September 14th. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Tupuktuk, Halifax.
And if you missed the first part of that story, you can find it on our aptnnews.ca website. Time for a quick break and then a story on Indigenous art at a fair price. Stay with us. Here's a look at the rest of your Wednesday weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. 14 with showers in Fort McMurray and Fort Chipewyan. 21 and rain in Medicine Hat. 17 with showers for Edmonton. 21 and rain for Vancouver, sunny, and 21 in Victoria. 19 under the sun for Fort Nelson, 17 in Smithers, 13 in Old Crow, 16 in Whitehorse and Watson Lake, 12 in Yellowknife, 14 and showers in Wrigley, 6 in Sax Harbor, 10 for Pawlatuck, 11 and rain for Chesterfield and Whale Cove, 9 with showers in Baker Lake, 3 with snow in Resolute, 7 in Iqaluit. Welcome back. Well, many retailers across Canada are eager to carry Indigenous art. Many of those artists end up selling their work for much less than it's worth. But one shop in Whitehorse isn't just buying art at a fair price. It's also encouraging Yukon artists to demand a fair wage for their work.
Here at Unorthodox in Whitehorse, you can find just about anything made by local First Nation artists. Pieces like these typically fly off the shelves, making owner Duma Awarid one of the go-to northern retailers for Indigenous artists. But that's not the only reason they like working with her.
This piece goes for $900. It's definitely a statement piece and well worth the money with the amount of semi-precious gemstones, gold, artistry.
Awarid is known for paying top dollar for pieces, which many artists say is a rarity in the retail world.
Beading has probably been a focus for me for about the last 6 years.
Randy Nelson is a Métis artist benefiting from Al Ward's pricing firsthand. Since selling some of her pieces to unorthodox, she's raised her prices thanks to Al Ward's encouragement.
I worked with Duma in figuring out my pricing, which was a learning curve for me. And she helped me establish confidence in my pricing and knowing what fair market value was for the rare materials and the time that it took me to make each piece. So now I feel like my items are fairly priced.
Duma says she's just trying to get artists to not sell themselves short.
I always felt it was underpriced. I felt like the artists were doing a disservice to themselves, the amount of time, effort, the materials that go into the product. So I really started to sit down, and as the artists would come in, I'd actually talk to them and say, you realize, like, I'm no expert, but you're really undervaluing your product.
While she's not Indigenous herself, Al Ward grew up in northern Canada, where her mother managed a First Nation and Inuit gallery. She says her early exposure to Indigenous art helped her form a deep appreciation for the artwork.
I just can appreciate and acknowledge the artistry behind it, the value behind it. Plus, as Indigenous people are learning more about their culture, the atrocities that have happened, but also reclaiming their culture and language, I think it's really important that I encourage that.
And for Selkirk First Nation artist Kaylin Baker, Al Ward has gone above and beyond.
She's introduced me to like a few clients, and I thought that was like I was really grateful for that. I'm currently working on an order actually that came from a woman who went to her shop and asked about my stuff, and I'm working on jewelry for her bridal party and the bride.
While she admits some of her prices are high, pieces like this patch can easily run into the thousands. At the end of the day, they're worth every penny.
It's art. I consider it wearable art. We put value on weird items like Louis Vuitton purses and luxury items, so why should there be hesitation in paying $1,000 for a beaded purse when you drop $1,000 on a mass-produced luxury item? I view it as art.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Some great looking work there. That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday, September the 1st, APTN's 21st birthday. And we leave you tonight with some stunning visuals. They're called the Northern Lights in English, in Inuktitut, Oxerneat. And this is the best time of year to see them. All of Iqaluit was looking up last night as one of the brightest displays in recent memory took over the sky. Enjoy some video and pictures from the show. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.